Oh, did you guys just hear that? What a great reminder to make sure that we record the whole thing. So we are now recording. Um, okay, well, thank you so much, Victoria, for the work and the time that you put into creating this video ahead of time and for being here. Guys, I didn't even introduce myself yet. My name is Alexandra Thompson. I'm an LCSW and the director of Cumberland Counseling Centers, both at our Smyrna location and our Lawrenceville location. So if at any time during this June event series that we have going on, if you think that counseling might be a really good idea or a really good next step for you or a loved one, reach out to us. We are probably the most approachable group of folks there are. And we absolutely adore and love what we do. So reach out and we can get you set up with one of our excellent therapists. And you guys are about to hear from one of them right now. And if you guys are ready, I'll go ahead and show the video. Just need to share my screen. Can you guys all see that? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Okay, good. Here we go.
Welcome. I'm Victoria Marie Hicks, and I am a marriage and family therapist, and I'm one of the counselors here at Cumberland Counseling. Today, I'm going to talk about generational parenting, growing in awareness of your parenting style. So, our parenting comes a lot from our own parents. So, how you were parented is passed down from your own caregivers, and your parenting affects your children and how they may one day parent. So self-awareness of your own parenting style can be the first step to positively impacting your children. And I'm going to address different parenting styles and what that looks like. So first, your parenting style greatly affects your style, and there's many different ways that this happens. So first, in how you handle emotions. So awareness and acceptance of your emotions is really important, and where you came from and what was okay and what was not okay is passed down to you and thus passed to your children. So things like anger. Is anger okay? Was it not okay? Is that the main way that we communicate to our children when we're upset? Is that the main way that your parents communicated? Or crying, being upset. Is it okay to be upset or is it not okay? And sometimes parents tell their kids to just calm down, and it's not a big deal. And what we say about our emotions, how we communicate about our emotions, really does affect our kids, and especially where we've come from. Another area is how we handle discipline. Do we give out more punishments than reinforcement? Did your parents give out more punishments than reinforcements? Do we threaten or give consequences that don't really match the crime or match the mistake? Do we not really reinforce what's going on? Or do we threaten that there's going to be a consequence but never give the consequence? Another area that this happens is if we grew up in an area of abuse. So hurt people, and sometimes generational abuse can be passed down if that cycle isn't broken. So if in our family there was physical abuse and that wasn't okay to handle how we're upset or how we're angry, that would be passed down sometimes through other parents to their children if that cycle is not broken and if that isn't addressed. So how you handle discipline, what does it look like in a healthy or unhealthy way, is going to be passed down. Three, how you handle conflict. So is conflict okay? Do we avoid conflict or do we address conflict? Does it involve yelling? Do we talk it out? Is there embarrassment when there's a conflict? Those things can be passed down from your parents and then to your children as well. How you communicate. What is okay to say? What is not okay to say? Some families are really, really honest and open, and they talk about a lot of things that happen. Some families avoid things, and a lot of that is how the parents address issues and how they talk about things when there is an issue. So how your parents dealt with that is affecting how you deal with that, and then that's how you teach your kids. And number five is how you give love and affection. Is affection okay? Is love okay? Or is it uncomfortable? What does physical contact look like? Is that an okay thing, or is that something that's not okay, or do we hug, do we not hug? Some of these things aren't necessarily a bad thing, but how you grew up and the area or environment that you grew up in is passed down to your kids, and it's combined with your spouse, right? They come from a different family as well. So these are some of the areas that affect your parenting style and some of the things that are addressed. And I'm going to talk about the different parenting styles and what that looks like, and then what does that mean to become aware of it. So there are three different main parenting styles that your parents will have and that you have, and thus it affects your kids. And the first one is authoritarian. And authoritarian parenting styles are rigid rules and strict obedience to authority. And permissiveness is the second one. And this is little guidance and allows too much freedom. And authoritative is firm and consistent guidance with love and affection. And so I'm going to talk about them, and inside of you, you might feel a little bit of a resistance. You might feel like, no, I'm not this parent. I'm not authoritarian or permissive. I'm authoritative. And many of you may have very healthy ways that you parent, but sometimes we tend to go over to authoritarian and permissive. So when I'm talking about these, pay attention to that. Pay attention to what's going on inside of you. Are you feeling resistant, or are you feeling defensive if you hear some of these things? Then we'll talk about how to be aware of that and what to do with that at the end. And to truly understand your parenting styles, we do have to discuss them in detail, but that resistance can come up a little bit. So the first one is authoritarian parent. And this, like I said, is someone who's very rigid with your rules. They're very strict in their obedience, and like authority and respecting authority is really, really important. So sometimes you could find yourself saying, if your child asks you a question, saying, asking you why. Kids ask why questions a lot. And you may say, well, because I said so, or that's just how it is. That's not inherently bad, but an authoritarian parent may tend to say that this is how it is. There's no question. You must follow it. Very more rigid and strict with rules and what that looks like. The authoritarian parents might be uncomfortable with physical affection, or threaten to withhold it when they're angry, or when kind of reacting out of anger. And authoritarian parents are more not apt to be warm or open with their children, and intimacy can often be missing, whether that is the parents are uncomfortable with the intimacy or talking about things, or that physical, healthy or appropriate physical touch. And often it's missing in relationships with their children. And another area is consequences. So when there are consequences, there's usually severe punishment, or sometimes a child may make a mistake and the consequences don't match that mistake. Maybe they forgot to do a chore, and the consequence isn't, you need to do extra chores. It's more, you can't go out for a month. So it's a very severe consequence to or a punishment to something, or a mistake that the child makes. So with authoritarian parents, there's a result from the child. There's a way that children might behave, or some qualities that they gain because of that. So children can be dependent and indecisive. So because they grew up in an environment where it's so strict and there's rules and you just have to follow without question, it can be hard for children to make decisions. It can be hard for children to learn to be independent. Sometimes they'll lack structure or support. While there was a lot of structure, they don't know how to develop that structure. They can't be independent. They don't know how to gain that support, or what that support might look like. Children can be withdrawn. They don't know how to have conversations or how to talk things through. They can be emotionally stiff. So emotions may be too much for them, or they don't know how to address them. They can lack curiosity because they grew up in a household that is very rigid and strict with their rules. They weren't allowed to discover their environment because there was a certain way to act or respond about things. They may have low self-esteem. So they don't have a healthy view of self, or they view themselves negatively. They also may seek approval of others and not know how to gain that approval of in themselves, but be more dependent on what others say about them. And sometimes children can also be like very hold to their own rules. This is what the rule is, and this is have to be, we have to follow it. But we know in life that rules are not always black and white, that there's gray area in life, and it may be harder for children who come from authoritarian parents to understand that or to live in that gray area at times. So the next parenting styles is permissive. So permissive parents are give little guidance and they allow too much freedom. And permissive parents tend to have the attitude of, well, do whatever you want, or I don't care. They may be more laissez-faire, like kids can do what they want. I'm going to give them a lot of freedom. And they don't necessarily care whether the child is around or not. Not that they don't care or love the child necessarily, but they just say that, they have all the freedom. They can do whatever they want to do. If you're a permissive parent, you might act like mistakes aren't a big deal. So if they make a mistake, it's not a big deal and they'll figure it out. And they rarely enforce rules. So they may have rules, parents may have rules in their mind, but permissive parents may not actually enforce those rules. So, and then in the end, they get frustrated when the rules aren't respected. And sometimes parents who work a lot may fall into this category because they don't have the time. And there are parents that have to work, and that's important for the family. But sometimes they fall into that permissive category because they're not around a lot. They're not able to be with their kids as much, and they can give them as more freedom, or the kids naturally have more freedom. So results with the children from permissive parenting, children can be rebellious. So even though you think that they wouldn't be rebellious, they're more apt to go do things. And sometimes, not always, sometimes it can be for attention. Like, I'm making all these mistakes because I want you to see, I want you to look, I want you to be aware of what's going on with me. They may not know social expectations, so they may not have been taught what it looks like and what's appropriate and not appropriate within social environments, because the parents are more hands-off and they didn't teach that to them. They may be frustrated by lack of direction. Children need boundaries. They thrive off of boundaries. If children were in a boundaryless society or home, it actually increases their anxiety because they don't know what to expect. And so when there are boundaries, they know what to expect, and their anxiety reduces because they know and they're confident of what's next or what's important or what the rules are. Children can be immature because they weren't really taught certain like social cues or what's okay, not okay within the school or at school or with their friends, or just in even work environments as they start to go into the workforce. They may have behavioral issues in school because they don't know how to respect rules or boundaries. If at home the rules and the boundaries weren't enforced, then they don't know what it looks like to respect those. They also may have poor self-control because they're not taught how to have self-control, or they're not taught what that looks like. They're not taught what discipline means. And so they learn not to have self-control because it may not matter so much when they're growing up. And so then the last parenting style is authoritative parent. And these parents tend to have firm and consistent guidance, and with love and affection. And firm and consistent guidance can look like discipline at times. And so with these parents, they tend to say things like, well, we have these rules because insert explanation. We do this because this is important to our family. We do this because we don't treat people negatively, right? They explain what is going on and why we have these rules and what that looks like. So authoritative parents, they balance their rights with that of the children, right? So it's a both and, it's not an either or. It's not a you do what I say or you do not. It's we're going to respect the parents, but we're also going to respect the children. What is important to the kids? What can we do for our kids? They set boundaries and they keep them. So we don't threaten the boundaries, or we don't say these are the boundaries and you have to respect them, but we say, hey, here are our boundaries and this is why, and this is what it looks like, and respecting that is important. They engage in praise, affection, reasoning, recognition with their children. This looks like, this can look like an everyday thing and having conversations with children. They encourage responsibility with the children. So making decisions is important, giving them some freedom to do that. And with that, age or appropriate age related guidance. So we know that elementary age kids need more guidance and probably a little less freedom, whereas teens, they may need less guidance in some areas and a little more freedom to make their own decisions sometimes. And so an authoritative parent is going to discern that, and they're going to know, based on my child's age and based on where they're at, this is the freedom I might give them, or these are the boundaries that I might set for them. So the results of children who have authoritative parents can be more independent. They know how to be independent, but they also can be connected to their caregivers. They can be connected to their family, and they can be aware of what it means to be a part of a family, but also be an independent person. They have their own strengths. So from that praise and affection from their parents, children tend to be aware of, these are the strengths I have. This is what I'm built and what that looks like, and have a positive self-esteem. They know how to navigate challenges. So they're taught how to address challenges, how to face them head on instead of maybe avoiding them. They tend to be self-controlled. They learn what it means to have self-control, to be aware of, I can't have everything at every moment. They learn to be assertive versus aggressive or passive. So have it in their communication, in their conflict, just in their social environments. What does it mean to be assertive? Children may be respectful towards themselves, but also towards others. So they know what it means to respect boundaries and respect other people and respect environments as well. And then they can have healthy decision-making skills. So what does it look like to make healthy decisions and to go through that process of discernment? And so the three styles, authoritarian, permissive, and authoritative, these are different parenting styles. And of course, the ideal is going to be an authoritative parent, someone who is firm and consistent with their guidance and also love and affection. However, we know as humans, we're not perfect. And so sometimes parents can kind of tend to be either more authoritarian or more permissive, just depending on how they grew up. And you can have a combination of the two. You can, as a parent, be more authoritative, but then also sometimes be more permissive. And especially when we're stressed, we can tend towards that more unhealthy style of parenting. You and your spouse can have completely different styles. And we know this in examples of children sometimes learn who to ask what. So if we know that dad is more authoritarian, it's going to be strict with the rules, but mom is more permissive and we want to do something, the children may ask the mom first because she's going to be more apt to say yes, right? And so sometimes that can be helpful because it balances out parenting, but being aware of what your parenting style is even more important. So how do I become more aware? How do I address my parenting style? And I'm going to talk about some areas in this. So again, you might feel some resistance when I talked about it. You might feel like, no, I'm not authoritarian or permissive, but often we do have elements of that, especially if we had parents who parented like that. So, and that's okay. And I want to tell you, we all don't fit in these boxes, these three different parenting boxes. We all are a combination, and we're human. We make mistakes, and that's okay. And so how do I become aware, and how do I change my parenting style to be a more healthy parent for my children? So reflect on your own parents. What was their style? What did they do? What kind of style was your dad or your mom or whatever caregivers you grew up with? What does that look like? And then how does that, one, reflect on your own style, and what is your own parenting style? Were you completely opposite from your parents because you were resentful to how they parented? Were you the same style because you agreed with it, or because it matched your personality? What is your own style? What elements or pieces do you have from each style? Do you have that? And then the third one is to become aware of your own emotions, because sometimes our emotions do affect our parenting style. how comfortable are you with emotions? When your child comes to you upset, what do you do? What happens inside of you? Are you like, oh, I don't know when to talk about this? Or and do you push through that? Or do you just like kind of avoid talking to them or just tell them to calm down? What does that look like? How do you handle emotions? Because our emotions do affect how we parent. Do we shut down when we experience emotions? And that might mean we fall into more permissive, or do we react when we see or hear or experience emotions? And that can sometimes tend to be more authoritarian. Number 4 is learn your own boundaries. What are your boundaries? What is okay and not okay with your children and when you're parenting? And then what are your boundaries with your spouse or the person that you're raising your children with? What does that look like? What are things that are important to you as parents and as a family? What's okay, what's not okay? And having that conversation is really important, because if you're on 2 different pages with your spouse, then you're going to parent 2 different ways, and there's often going to be conflict because of that. So being aware of what that looks like is really going to be important. And so naturally, number 5 is to see a therapist, because I'm one myself. And I think it's really important, because if we have a hard time connecting with where we came from and what our own style is, sometimes a therapist can do that. They can help you unpack your thoughts and emotions and behaviors and gain some more awareness to see our blind spots. And often they're trained to ask those questions. They're trained to know what to look for, what questions to ask their clients. And so seeing a therapist as a couple or as an individual can help you become aware of that, and sometimes process through some things from your own parent style that may affect you that you've never talked about before. And the last one I want to say is to give yourself some grace, because I think it's easy as parents to be frustrated or to be hard on ourselves when we make a mistake. You're human. You make a mistake. And luckily, God gives us grace as parents, and it's okay. And it's okay to mess up and to say, hey, I'm sorry, and to work on it. And it takes time to change. It's going to take some time. But all that matters is you keep trying and you don't give up.
All right, y'all. Victoria, thank you so much. What a great little, yeah, I see some people clapping over there. You can give your little reaction, your clapping reaction. Thank you guys for your attention. Thanks for listening. She gave such great little nuggets. And one thing I meant to share with you guys at the beginning is just remember that this is kind of the tip of the iceberg of information. We didn't want to overwhelm you with anything. We didn't want to, be too therapist-y and speak our therapist-ese, our own language, right? We wanted to make this something that anyone could learn from and anyone could come up with 100 questions about. Okay, so thank you so much, Victoria. And let's ask questions. So guys, remember, and if you're new, if you weren't here at the beginning, you are welcome to private message me. You'll see if you want to ask a question that's confidential, click on where you would chat, where it says everybody, and click on private messages. That'll go to just me. No one else will see that. Or you can chat, you can put it into the chat if you'd rather not ask it from your face. Or you can ask directly. Victoria, being our teaching therapist, she's going to handle most of the questions, and I might dive in. Other people can certainly piggyback and all of that. So let's dive in. What questions did this bring up for any of you? Also, just before we dive in, there are going to be some awkward silences to give time for people to come up with a question. So if there's an awkward silence, just lean into it. It's okay. So what questions came up? What would you like to ask? How about just to kick us off, Victoria, I wrote down a question from really early on. You mentioned early on in your video, punishments versus reinforcements. Can you explain the difference between those two and when they would be used in parenting?
Yeah, so reinforcement, the goal is to increase a behavior. So you're going to reinforce a behavior, and so the goal is to increase. And so then a punishment, the goal would be to decrease a behavior. So you might, if your child gets good grades, you might give them, some people give them money, right? Or you might give them extra privileges. That is something, that's a reinforcement that's going to increase their behavior. So the likelihood that they will do that same, get good grades again, because you're reinforcing. Whereas a punishment is going to be something like, they came home late. If we're talking about older kids, right? If they came home too late, like after their curfew, then you take their phone away. And that's the goal, is to decrease the likelihood that they will come home late again. And so knowing the difference, and they say to use punishment sparingly and reinforcement more often, because, and punishment, also using it wisely, because if we do too harsh punishment, that can cause rebellion, or if we do too little punishment, then we're not decreasing any behaviors. But the hope is that we give reinforcements to increase the positive behaviors. Even if they do something negatively, you focus on what the positive piece is and reinforce that, so that will increase. So that's kind of the biggest difference, and I think we get those confused a lot. So
I think what we get confused so often on is the difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Can you touch on that just a little bit?
mhm. um, so I teach this a lot too to undergrad students, and I always get confused. But so positive would be adding something. And so you said punishment
Yeah,
or
like
reinforcement?
positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement, and maybe
So reinforcement, the goal is to increase behavior. Okay. And so positive reinforcement would be you're adding something to increase behavior. You got good grades, we're going to give you more freedom, or we're going to give you money. That's adding something positive. You're adding something to increase behavior. And then negative reinforcement be removing something to increase behavior. And I always have a hard time coming up with an example for this one. I don't know, you can help me out, Alex. But basically, positive and negative is adding or taking something away,
yeah.
and reinforcement is increasing.
Well, isn't it positive reinforcement is something that we want to positively reinforce, but negative reinforcement is something that we want to negatively, like we want to reinforce by taking something away. So it's still a good behavior that we want to make sure a child is doing more of, for example, by taking something away versus by adding something.
Well, it's all about the, like, what you do to, so positive is adding something to increase behavior, and negative would be removing something to increase behavior.
Right.
So your kid always gets into the drawers and the well, I'm trying to think of a example for that. But basically, it's like if you're adding or removing something, then that's positive or negative, and reinforcement would be the goal to increase it. If that makes sense.
Right. For the purpose of keeping a good behavior, keeping something that we want.
Right, right,
And
and increasing a behavior you want. And punishment would be doing something to decrease a behavior.
right. So we can sometimes just get those a little backwards, because there is positive punishment and there is negative punishment.
And again, so punishment would be the goal is to decrease behavior. So positive punishment, you're adding something to decrease behavior. A spanking would be at giving them something to decrease the likelihood that something will continue. And then negative punishment would be removing something. So like taking their phone away in order to decrease the likelihood they'll come home later, sort of thing. So.
Okay, so we had two questions come up. One, it seems like maybe they wanted it to be a little bit not coming directly from their face. So that first one was, if someone identifies with one parenting style, how do you unlearn that and build new habits? Do you have any suggestions or feedback for that?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is like self-awareness, because you don't know, like you're not going to know what to change if you're not aware of what it is. You're gonna, and I think we do this a lot. We're like, oh, let's just fix this. How about I do that? But then we don't start with, well, actually, what's going on? What is my style? What does it look like day to day, in the little things and the big things? Where did I learn this style? And being aware of like what's going on inside of me when this happens. Like, am I engaging in permissive style because I'm shutting down myself, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this kid who's not listening, and I'm just going to shut down and not care, right? That's a self-awareness in yourself to know what's actually going on, because we can't fix anything until we are aware of what's actually happening first. And then we know, okay, I'm shutting down. So now what do I do? Do I try to cope so that I don't shut down? Do I unpack where that shutdown comes from? And so I think building new habits would be, okay, now I know where it's coming from. What can I do next? Do I read a book? Do I go to therapy? Do I, pay attention to, am I doing a lot more punishments than reinforcements? Like what worked for this child and what doesn't? Do I talk to my kids about this and see how they feel? Am I communicating with them in some way? And so I think that awareness is a big piece, because we don't know what to fix until we're aware of what the problem actually is. And then kind of building new habits, kind of a general, it's hard to get real specific on that without like a specific example, but a lot of it is, seeking help in some ways, whether you read a book or you talk to other parents or you go to therapy, like, and so it starts small like that and can build on it.
Mhm. Becoming very aware of what your actual style is, probably becoming more aware of the style of parenting you had growing up, and then being able to decide sort of what would be done differently in the future of the parenting style that you would rather implement or you'd rather have more of. And then just sort of training yourself to have constant presence of mind when you're with your children and how you're parenting them.
Right. Not only what your style is, but what does it look like? Because a permissive parent can look differently depending on the person. And so recognizing when that's coming up for you. Oh, I'm going to my permissive side right now. What's going on? How come? What keeps me, what's causing that to happen in some ways?
Goodness, it just takes a lot of awareness. And that's what I think
Mhm.
that's the main goal of probably this conversation is just, hey, parents, it's time to get a little bit more mindful in your day-to-day interactions with your kids moving forward.
Mhm.
Jen Braun, I saw that you physically raised your hand. Do you remember what your question was?
I think I was just getting the positive reinforcement confused because we were trying to come up with examples. So I think my initial thought, because then you said later, sometimes we get it backward. I was immediately went to, oh, your kid gets bad grades. So you take away the Xbox, or whatever. So I think I got a little bit backward.
And taking away Xbox because you're trying to decrease the behavior that they'll get bad grades again. That's a punishment.
Yes.
As opposed to someone gets good grades, you want to, give them something. That's a reinforcement. Yeah. There
Right.
It is really confusing. I teach this and I've taught it for like 5 years and I always get it wrong. So
No, that's good. You back toward the end and I was like, oh, I got it wrong. So
Sorry, guys, I had a yappy dog right outside my window. And, just to piggyback on that, Jen and Victoria, because this is really, really confusing. If your child is getting bad grades, just to use that example, and you are trying to decrease that behavior, you could actually be positively, or you could actually be reinforcing that behavior without realizing it. Thinking that you're punishing, you are actually reinforcing. And what that might look like is is trying to punish in some way, taking away the Xbox, but then not following through or not being consistent with it or something like that might actually inadvertently be sort of letting them know that you don't mean what you say and it's okay, and they can get their Xbox after maybe 2 hours of not being able to have it, and bad grades don't really matter because you are not punishing at all. You're actually reinforcing that what you say you don't really mean. And after a couple of hours, he can get it right back. Can you think of any other examples like that, Victoria? That's maybe a little bit more clear.
Well, I think to that point too is like matching the consequence to the crime in some sense. So taking away like if we use that example, taking away your Xbox for bad grades, I don't know if that would make an effect on them because like, oh, okay, well, it's just a day, it's not a big deal. And then, summer passes and then next semester in the fall, they don't even they don't remember that punishment. As opposed to, I remember when I think I got a D in a class and my dad was like, that's not okay. And my grades were slipping in high school. And he's like, okay, well, your punishment is now, I think he said, like, I have to see your grades every day and you have to get them up. And if you don't get them up, by a certain time, he gave me some what do you call them, like points where I check in. I had to stop driving my car and take the bus, and I think I didn't meet one of the checkpoints and I did have to ride the bus. And so like that really affects me because I have to now get up earlier, I have to ride the bus, I didn't get my grade up, and like that matched the crime, as opposed to like taking something away for grades, they like will forget about it, it's not a big deal. And so like matching, some like being creative, and then also thinking, does this affect them enough to where it's like, okay, no, they know that this is really important to change the behavior because of how also the punishment affected me. And so and you have to get creative because every child's different. Some things work more with others than other children, and some kids respond really well to punishment or reinforcement and some don't. And so kind of discerning your child and what works with them and what doesn't. Sometimes there's trial and error in some sense.
Yeah, we like to, or maybe I'll speak for myself, something that I'll say with parents a lot is you do need to find something that's going to hurt just a little. And I know that sounds kind of funny to say, but it's got to be something that's going to hurt. So and I don't mean physically, obviously, something that's going to make them go, I would do anything to get rid of this thing, to get that thing back. So Jen, maybe it is Xbox, maybe it doesn't hurt them, or the length of time isn't quite as important to them and they know they can get it and it's just not really working. So to speak to what Victoria is saying, to get creative with what is actually going to hurt just a little bit, that they would do anything to get that thing back.
And that worked for me because, well, in some sense, eventually I got my grades up, but it worked for me because I hate getting up early and they knew that. And so to ride the bus, I had to get up early. So it did, like, that one got me. Whereas a kid who maybe doesn't care about getting up early or taking the bus, that wouldn't be a good like punishment for them.
Right. Exactly. Okay, Yost couple, which I think has gone down just to one end of the couple now. Do you remember what your question was?
No.
Oh no!
I think that my question was too specific. It like could potentially get us off topic onto like a different place. So
that's okay. If you happen to remember, it's okay to go off on a little bit of
I like generally remember it, but I told my husband, text it to me because he said, ask this question, and then he had to go to something else. So he was saying like, in our case, like we have one of our sons who's like almost 13, and he seems to like have a hard time remembering anything. And like we have like a checklist on the fridge with like all the things, like a to-do list every day, like Monday through Sunday, like literally like, I mean, brush teeth, make bed, like take vitamins, like everything is on there. And what we do, and he has like 6 game slots for the weekend. He gets 3 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, like 3 30-minute or 6 30-minute slots anyway. So if he doesn't do everything on his checklist for the AM or the PM, like not only does he lose like 50 cents of his allowance, but he'll also like lose a game slot. But it seems like we've been doing this for like several years, and I can't seem to find like the way to reinforce it, like either positively or negatively to get the desired behavior. And sometimes like I'll say things really nicely. Like I'll be like going in my good parenting, the third one. And then sometimes I feel like I can't get his attention without like yelling, like, hey. And I'm like, why do I have to like raise my voice and talk in this tone of voice to get your attention? Like I tried to say it the nice way, like, okay, honey, like we've got to do this and this, like, and then that doesn't work. So I always have to like, seems like I always end up raising my voice. And I don't know if anyone else has ever had an experience similar to that. And I don't want to like yell, like, and I'm like, why do I have to always get to the yelling? So there's two parts to that, two questions. Number one, like the whole to-do list. And then the second one, like the yelling, like after the nice, nice, nice.
Mhm. I think, and Alex, feel free to add too, but I wonder what it would look like to have a conversation and kind of empower him to come up also with um, like reinforcements or punishments for certain behaviors, and ask him how he feels, like being able to work together in some sense, and talk about like what's going on when you don't listen to me, or when I have to yell. What happens in you when I yell? Tell me about that. Like kind of getting underneath some of that to connect and see what's going on and how he's feeling. I think that can be a big part of it. And maybe some of those things are overwhelming. Do we need to break them down more? Do we need to like brushing teeth? Like, and this is an example, but brushing teeth, is that overwhelming? Because he's like, well, where's the toothbrush and where's the toothpaste? Like, what keeps him from engaging in those behaviors? Is it like brush your teeth's too overwhelming, or is it I can't remember it? Like kind of working together, because it's at 13 too. I think it's really hard because the they get to that point where they're like, I don't want to listen to my parents and I want to do things on my own. And so empowering them a little, I wonder if that can be helpful, or if that can make a difference too. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where my head was at as well. One thought came to mind. There is an excellent podcast called Raising Boys and Girls. And this podcast talks about the difference between raising females versus raising males at different developmental stages of their life. And one of the male therapists actually speaks to this a bit. He says something like, with males, and he's even talking about, I think around this age, around 13, they cannot handle too much instruction. There's just too much going on in their minds. Their brains aren't fully developed and all of that. So one thought that came to my mind is, when you're asking him to get these things done, is it just one step at a time, or do you tend to notice that it's lots of directions at one time? So an example, and you might be on mute, but an example would be, I need you to get out of the van, put your cleats up. You got to go upstairs, take a shower, brush your teeth, make sure you're ready for bed, and I'll come up and meet you so that we can work on your science homework, versus drop your boots, brush your teeth, I'll see you then.
It's more like got to the point where I'm like, make sure you check your list off and do your list, because he doesn't respond well to like all the things at once, because he just forgets. Like, it's overwhelming. And I think about how if somebody's like to me, I'm like, oh, so yeah, it's more like empowering. I'm like, hey buddy, like, did you make sure to check your list off? And if you didn't, and I have to remind you, like, unfortunately, like, here's the consequence. I've tried to empower him, like, okay, well, you have to find a system that works for you. Like, what do you think would work for you? Because like sometimes it's gotten to where he's in tears and like, I don't know, like, he's like feeling like something's wrong with him, because he literally can't seem to remember to do it. And so then we're working backwards. Like, I'm like, that's not you, like with the I am statements and all that, like, you know what I mean? Like telling him, no, nothing's wrong with you. Like, you've just got to figure out your system. Like, we can do it. How can I help you? So I just didn't know, like, I don't want to take up too much time, but I was just wondering if any other parents like have ever struggled with that. And I think you guys gave some good feedback.
And I think it would be helpful too at that age if he had someone to talk to. Like maybe it might be helpful to help him have like a therapist or something that can help him work through that. Like, because that's a big feeling. Like I, not good enough, or I can't do this, or like I'm just gonna fail. Like I can't remember exactly what you said, but those are some big beliefs there that might be blocking his ability. And then he's 13, and maybe he, looking at his forgetfulness, is that a thing, or is that just because he's so overwhelmed with that feeling of like I'm going to fail at this or something like that too? That could be helpful to have support for him on his own, to see what's underneath there, what's going on that maybe could prevent him from remembering the things, or apart from being 13 and a boy.
Yeah. Yeah. Potential, to be personal with you guys for a moment, I have ADHD. So if I don't have everything written down in my calendar with reminders, and I don't know if y'all have heard my phone go off a number of times with little reminders to wrap things up, I will forget as well. And I'm not a 13-year-old boy, so I have a little bit of an edge on him. It could be something as simple as that too. Not that ADHD is simple at all. And we certainly don't want to just slap diagnoses on people, because it might not be that either. But that's definitely something to potentially talk to someone about, because I know that receiving that diagnosis, that ADHD diagnosis as an adult, helped me realize that, gosh, there's nothing wrong with me. I actually have a really beautiful mind. I just have so much in my mind that it has to be organized in a certain way so that I won't forget things. It was actually really empowering to know that about myself. So maybe that's something you guys could look into. And an idea that came to my mind too is one of those, like if you've ever seen a little metal ring with like papers that hang off, like flashcards. At a certain time, a very consistent time of the evening, maybe even just being responsible for handing him this card, or this, system of cards that says, "Welcome to your evening routine," or whatever it might be. And he flips the page. The first step is take a shower. Once he's done that, then he can flip the next page. So it's tangible. So it might be, looking at a list is sometimes a little overwhelming for me, and I'm a 33-year-old adult. Looking at a very long list of things might be overwhelming, but maybe something tangible that's one by one in his hand would be helpful. Little pieces of paper. Take a shower, hang up your towel, brush your teeth, pajamas on, so he can just go through each one like that, rather than looking at a list that might be a million different things to his mind, that's making, reinforcing that I'm never going to be able to do this because it's too much, kind of thing. So it's 7:30. If anyone needs to jump off, please do so. These questions were great. And I hope that if anybody else had any thoughts or any questions, that you were able to get them answered just by kind of hearing our discussion. Remember, guys, that next Tuesday at 6:30, on the same Zoom link that you got when you registered, we're going to have another therapist, one of our other therapists named Robert Vore, and he's going to be teaching on raising a teen with big emotions, which I'm sure everybody on this call is like, right? So if you can, please join us again next week at 6:30. Robert Vore is fantastic. He is a certified clinical anxiety treatment professional. He focuses on anxiety, depression, and suicidality, specifically for the 12 to 30 age range. So please come back. His talk is excellent, and then you'll be able to chat with him directly. And that's next Tuesday at 6:30. Any last thoughts?
Someone asked if you can access the playback after this, and where that can be.
Yes, definitely. I will get everything downloaded and ready. I think I'll put it up on a YouTube, like on just a YouTube link. And I can email that to everybody who was here or wasn't here, so you can access it later. So you'll get it in an email. It'll just be a little YouTube link. Great question. Any last thoughts? Any last questions? Great. Well, we finished right on time. When does that ever happen with these kinds of things? That's amazing. Thank you guys for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week at 6:30 for Raising a Teen with Big Emotions. And I don't know about Victoria, but I'll stick around for a couple minutes if you guys want to kind of let some folks fade off and then you want to ask more questions. I'll be here.
Thank you, ladies.
You're so
welcome.
welcome. Thanks for coming. So Michael Hamilton, I see that you just joined us. We actually just finished, but I still wanted to let you have access so that I could tell you that we will email the recording of this entire evening. So you can listen to it as you're falling asleep tonight if you'd like to. So I wonder if these last folks sticking around, if they walked away and forgot they were on the call.
I think you can like I think they you can, if they don't answer, you can like put them back in the waiting room.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close out. I'm going to stop recording. And for any of you who are left, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next week.